So, banks are normally always suspicious of everybody, but as we enter football bowl season, right? And as we enter the holiday seasons, one thing keeps coming up are these Capital One commercials. Well, what is Capital One? I had somebody kind of talking with me about this the other day, and I'm a Capital One customer, and Lord knows I have my fair share of complaints with Capital One. But who is Capital One and where did they come from? So, a lot of people don't know this, but Capital One was originally spun off of Signet Bank way back in what was it, 1994 or something like that. And they were just this traditional kind of credit card scam, like this big financial scheme that makes money off of poor people, charging them high interest, on credit cards, right? That's basically what it was. And they were a mass market kind of thing. They just mass marketed to poor people, right? Looking for some money. And they had these kind of easily adopted credit card strategies, much like Credit One Bank today, stuff like that. But yeah, they kind of started in 1994 as a spinoff of Signet. Yeah, that's where they started. So what they would do is they would lend high interest money to subprime borrowers, basically, like I said, poor people, right? People with lower credit scores, higher risk for the bank, they paid the higher interest. And Capital One made a lot of money off of that. Late 90s and early 2000s, Capital One really became a powerhouse. And they were, at least in the world of credit cards, they didn't come a traditional bank, if you will. And they're still not really a traditional bank, which for some intents and purposes is not a bad thing because the traditional banking model is kind of wore out and stupid. But they're not really a real bank like you and I think of a real bank. But back in the day, they offered loans, student loans. They did, like I said, marketed to people with low credit scores. They were took on some high risk borrowers. Banks don't like risk. They tell you and I, to take a risk, and seek out the reward. But they don't like risk themselves, right? They're very risk averse things. So you see the dichotomy of the banks, but sticking to Capital One, they were just basically a credit card company. But then in the 90s and 2000s, they kind of adapted this slogan, "What's in your wallet?" kind of thing, right? Where they were, trying to convince people that was money out there for them to have if they just paid for it, right? And in fact, it was just big branding. That's all it really was. It was just big branding. And to easily explain Capital One, you have to think of them like the Walmart of credit cards. That's what they were in the 90s and 2000s. But then let's fast forward to the 2008 financial crisis. That's when Capital One really started to get a hold on the market. So they bought up a couple of struggling banks. For those of you on the East Coast, you might remember Chevy Chase Bank. They were out there, I think. And then you might also remember ING Direct. They were online savings accounts basically for people. Capital One ended up buying them up about the 2008 recession, when the big financial crisis hit. And that's when they began to acquire, this real bank charter that they needed to become a real bank. They became FDIC insured. They got into mortgages, checking, auto loans, all this stuff, right? And still today you see that these games going back to their old credit card days still being played. But there's an allure with Capital One. An allure, it's a marketing scheme, right? That makes you think everybody just wants Capital One. But do they? So if you really get to the bottom of it, it was in 2008. That's when their real marketing kind of thing, their level up, if you will, Capital One started to come up a little bit in the world. And my God, man, they were everywhere. I mean, Capital One's marketing was everywhere. But Capital One itself didn't really exist where you and I exist in the real world. So then about 2010, okay, after they became a bank, a chartered bank in 2012, right? They kind of started to buy into this upscale tech kind of world, right? That gave them a whole new vibe. They were going to be more approachable to the young millennials and to the younger people, and they opened up these cafes and these really exclusive zip codes, places like Beverly Hills, parts of Chicago, DC, San Francisco neighborhoods. They're only in very certain zip codes, right? There's a reason for that because they want to appear like they're classy, like they're stylish, like they're really, bussing, they're these little techie bros, They start advertising for college football, bruh, that kind of crowd. And that's when they really started catering to the elite, if you will, and kind of the people that wanted to be elite. Now, Capital One kind of branded themselves as this Silicon Valley adjacent financial institution, right? That was going to really be somebody and really grow up to be somebody. And, they sponsor things like South by Southwest and, they hire an ex Google executive or something, or an Amazon talent, They're really a tech company at the heart of it, right? That's what they're trying to promote themselves as. And their angle, or at least from what you can tell by looking through the marketing, right? If you look through the marketing, marketing's really just a scam anyway. But they're trying to show themselves as being the bank for the modern, mobile first kind of empowered customer who wants all this freedom. Well, that works all good and great until you actually need a human to get involved. And then you start dealing with offshore customer support, and you never can get a hold of anybody. Decisions can't be made by an actual human, everything is done by an algorithm. The tech behind the bank is really shoddy. So, while they appear to be this kind of tech elite kind of company, behind the scenes, if you scrape off all of this, it just kind of becomes this same questionable little credit card company that issues out these predatory rates. And they have multiple card products, they don't have traditional banking products, very selective high touch clients. You have to reside in a certain zip code to get the perks, right? And they're really kind of this low value customer service kind of brand, but yet they really tried to appeal to the millennials. So what that goes to show you is you can sell a young millennial any fucking thing. If you look at these Capital One cafes and stuff like that, they're mainly in these really affluent areas. That's by design, okay? So if you really think about it, that this is what they want it to do. They want this upscale facade, right? These cafes make them feel a little more modern. They look a little cool. They feel a little different, a little bit boutiquey, which is what the young millennials really like. And they put them in areas where these young professionals kind of congregate, right? And these young millennials kind of congregate. That's not service, that's branding. Okay. So they're trying to make you feel like we're a bank for everybody, but yet we're still a little bit exclusive. There's a little bit of scarcity into this. So you see how their Capital One is a good marketing strategy for trying to appear elusive, trying to appear very um, niche, trying to appear very boutique, but still trying to appeal to the masses because you need the masses to put money in these bullshit CDs that they have, which are better than some banks, but they're still, what are you getting off of it? You put $1,000 in there, they're lending 800 of it, and you're getting 4.5% off of your CD. You're not getting that much money off of it. So if you ever look at Capital One and you kind of get this gut feeling that they're kind of this lower tier banking, making a massive amount of money off of the average Joe while trying to appear like they're upscale. If you ever get that feeling from Capital One, you're not wrong. Okay, you're just not. It's the absolute truth. And this isn't by accident. This is their business model. This is how Capital One operates. Have hidden wealth programs? Absolutely, they do. All banks have them, right? But instead of marketing it out like J.P. Morgan or Wells Fargo, somebody like that, they don't really put these brands like relationship banking and all this. Everybody has an algorithm kind of attached to them, and the algorithm determines whether or not you're actually worth the bank's money and the time and the bank's effort to put you into these programs. So instead of a human actually making some decisions, you actually have just algorithms. So I think Capital One is kind of a really good example of how algorithms are running our businesses today, not humans. And that's a good case study. So the real talk about Capital One is they basically started as just a very simple credit card scheme, a very simple credit card company that was, they turned into a real bank, if you will, by buying up a couple of other banks, got a charter, whole 9 yards. And then they kind of created this tech centric company with some really crazy branding. That's kind of Capital One in a nutshell. They want to appear a little bit elite. They want to appear a little bit um, elusive. They want to appear a little bit scarce, because they think scarcity sells. But then again, they also want to try to appeal to the masses because they need the masses who are willing to pay the 30% or whatever it is on a credit card, 28%, whatever it is. So that's how they survive, right? I mean, they get 28% and give back 4%, or five, well, 4.9, whatever it is. So that's how they operate. I mean, which in theory sounds like you're getting a shit ton of money back, but really you're not. I mean, it's really not that great. But yeah, their internal service is shit. Most folks never get access to the high wealth stuff. No, most folks never get access to the real perks if there are any, because algorithms shelter people from that, right? So, when I go and I talk to my neighbors, a lot of them have quite a bit of money, quite a bit more money than I do. Um, it's funny, none of them use Capital One. So my name is Matt. This is my channel. I talk about all sorts of stuff on here. I mean, one day we're hating on banks, next day we're hating on academia, next day we're hating on politics. Whatever it is, I'm a multi-purpose talker. Okay, this is my channel. There's a lot of interesting playlists out there. This is just life in the world as I see it. It's nothing special. But this has been my daily vlog, almost daily vlog. Okay. Tune in later. We'll see you soon.